we've got something like half the people here are from interstate. There are people from New Zealand. There maybe is even someone from Japan. So, and it's a wide cross-section of people from all walks of life. So,
and one from Chile.
And one from Chile.
One from Chile.
We keep the best to last. And so there's a wide cross-section. I'd like to encourage you to network as much as you want to do, and there's some aids to networking outside, and I'll talk more about that later. Just very briefly, the schedule will be something like 2 sessions each morning, 2 sessions each afternoon, break for coffee. Lunch will be around about an hour and a half next door. They're currently organising how that will happen for people who are having lunch here. And we'll finish about 5 o'clock. We start tomorrow at 9:30, so there's no registration time tomorrow. David McPherson and Marina are on the video here, and they've asked me to tell you there are ceiling mics hanging down which are for questions. There's one here and one here, so if you're moving around, please be careful of the wires. And we've wired it so that hopefully we can pick up all questions. And so would you talk up clearly when you ask a question? For people who are staying at the Novotel just around the corner, I omitted to mention before, they probably will provide a discount if you say you're doing a course at the AIM. So if you're booked in there and you're paying full rates, you can maybe get something else. So that's it.
Okay.
I would like to introduce Umberto Maturana, who's been here now for 2 days and worked very hard in those 2 days. And I'm not going to say much because Umberto gets to say all he needs to say. But would you please welcome Umberto?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope that you welcome me so happily at the end too. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and that you are here to listen. Some of you have heard me before, and I feel a little bit shy because I do not change so much in 2 years to be able to tell a new story or a new view in the understanding of which I'm going to talk about in 2 years. But maybe in a way it's good that some of you have heard me already, because what I do is a little bit like what happens in the Balinese shadow theater. In Bali, shadow theater is performed in the street. Whenever there is some distress in a family, they call for the puppeteer to perform. And what happens is that there is distress in a family or in a town when a demon gets in. And the entrance of the houses are a little bit like this. So people move, so to say, in a waving manner, so people can normally do this. But demons move in a straight line and normally cannot enter the house. But if they manage to enter the house, then there is distress, problems, and they invite the puppeteer, who performs here in the street, in front of the house, but the performance is to the street. And the idea is that the demon gets entertained and does not enter the house. And the performance goes from, let's say, from the evening of one day, the whole night and the whole day until the evening of the next day. And the performance is always a known story. A story that everybody knows. They're traditional stories. which are secular stories in the sense that they take place as a history that begins in one point and ends in the same point. And they're traditional ones, as I said, everybody knows. And what the puppeteer does is to expand one piece or another of this well-known secular story according to his understanding of the distress of the family who has called him. The story could be that the king of the land has news that some enemies are in the border and he has to defend the kingdom, and so he's in his palace with counselors talking about what to do, and of course the council has led to the realization that a war has to take place, and for that a hero is needed to lead the armies. And the hero is certainly Arjuna, who is meditating in the forest. So the emissaries must go to the forest to invite Arjuna out of his meditation without he becoming angry, convincing him or seducing him to lead the army of the king, then going to the war, the battle, the victory. Arjuna goes back to the forest to meditate, and the emissaries go back to the king. So this is a secular story. And the puppeteer expands one part or another of this story. Well, this is what I'm going to do. I shall expand one part or another of the story that many of you already know, that I'm going to tell, which has to do with cognition. With the question of cognition, I have even made some little notes to tell you what I'm going to do. So today I shall speak about the question of cognition. I see you have there a diagram which I call the ontological diagram. I shall discuss the matter of the epistemology of knowledge, explaining cognition and so on and so forth. And in the afternoon I shall speak about structural determinism and scientific explanations. Tomorrow I shall deal with the history of living systems, speak about evolution, then talk about language, emotions in the afternoon perhaps. And in the third day I shall speak about the origin of humanness and culture. And I shall end with some reflections in relation to the origin of humanness and politics and democracy. You will realize that to speak about politics and democracy in a way is coming back to the beginning. So the whole story will be secular, because we'll have to do through a whole development of reflections on processes, starting from human relations, to come back to human relations again at the end. Now, why the whole story? Why I'm telling all this to you? Well, the first answer is because David invited me. So this is a very straightforward, yes, I came here because David invited me. At the same time, although what I'm saying may sound in some moments as reflections which have to do with human relations, I'm making no recommendation. I'm not a messenger of anything. But what I shall do is to reflect upon the conditions that have to be satisfied for certain phenomena to take place in human life. So in a way I shall be doing an analytical reflection about humanness and what must happen such that, for example, social relations take place or cognition takes place, and which are the implications which I think are relevant in this for us nowadays. And I'm concerned with nowadays, as everybody must be concerned probably, because it's the present of our life. Life takes place in the present. If you were to ask me about history or about time, about past and future, I would say life takes place in the present. Past and future are manners of living in the present. And so this is all that one has, the present. So I'm interested in the present, and through understanding the present, understanding the past, which is a manner of living the present, and through understanding the past as a manner of living the present, understanding the future, which I may be willing or not to bring about, or which may be happening to me. Now, this situation that we are in the present is not a trivial one. I shall come to this later on when I speak about the history of living systems. But I would like to give you an image which I shall retake later on. And the image is that of a wave front spreading. If there is a pool, if this were a pool, no wind, very quiet, and you were to drop a stone there in the middle, a wave will begin to propagate, or a series of waves will propagate. And the wave front is always a wave front. The present of the wave is continuously changing, but does not take place beyond the wave front. Not behind the wave front, not in front of the wave front, is taking place in the wave front, which is propagating. And what is very interesting in a propagating wave, you drop the stone here, and the wave begins to propagate. What is very interesting in a wave front is that all the points of the wave fronts are coherent with each other, although they are not necessarily directly related with each other. They are coherent through their origin. The particles floating on the pool, which begin to move as the wave propagates. The particles that move at different parts of the wave front move coherently with each other as a result of history. The particles here and the particles here are coherent with each other in the movement, not because they are interconnected, but because they are part of a history, which is the history of propagation of the wavefront. At the same time, there are certain local coherences which result from neighborhood. Now, we living systems live in the present, and the present of living system is the present of a wavefront, which began when life began, 3,500 million years ago. More or less, I mean, a few thousand years more or less for 3,500 million is not too much. You don't ask me for a very great precision, I cannot give you a great precision, but let us say around 3,500 million years ago, life began. And it's a history of change as a wavefront. And so all living systems are interconnected, are related. There are synchronicities, so to say, in what happens with living systems, not because they are in touch with each other, but because they are part of a history, of the same history. And to understand this, I think, is of interest. Precisely because we are discovering in this moment in the Earth that we are so interconnected and so related that organisms, living beings which seem to have completely independent histories, turn out that they are interconnected, they are related. Their lives are congruent in some ways which are not dependent on the locality of their interactions. They are dependent on the coherences which arise from a history of transformation, like in a wavefront. And this is of great significance because if we realize that something of this sort is happening, then we have an additional dimension for understanding how phenomena, processes that seem to occur with complete independency, like the movement of the particles of two opposing points of the wavefront, are coherent with each other. And you don't have to find a causal relation for that coherence as you would find if you were to look into the interactions in the locality. So we find in life coherences among living systems that surprise us. And the whole story of ecology has to do with this. One finds that one performs a little modification here, and gigantic changes take place in another place. And there is no causal relation, but there is a relation between these phenomena here and these phenomena here, which have to do with the coherence which is being altered, not because they are in causal contact, but because they belong to a coherent system that is transforming as a wavefront. Okay, we can talk a little bit more about that. But it is in face of that, among other things, that the question about knowledge appears. We do things here and things happen there. What knowledge do we need to understand this? And this is very forceful for us. We cannot pretend that this is not the case. We are transforming the world. We live and we transform the world. The other aspect which has to do with what I'm going to be talking about is the fact that we use knowledge in daily life continuously. We claim knowledge, we demand knowledge, we fight about knowledge. We kill each other claiming that we know and the others do not know. What is knowledge? What is to know? How does knowledge relate with our living as living beings, with our doings as human beings? We don't have to start from this idea of being the present of a wavefront, but if we have this image, how can one make a claim like that? And have a claim that is meaningful for us, because it turns out to be meaningful, because we find ourselves in these situations in which we are in coherent relations, even though we belong apparently to different particular histories. I come from Chile to Melbourne in Australia, and I speak to you, and I'm not a total foreigner. Well, I'm a foreigner, and yet I'm not an alien. I don't come from from an entirely different world, yet I come from a different world, but yet not entirely. How come that there is this possibility of coherence? How should one understand this? One way of understanding is, of course, is that we are talking about a reality independent from us, which is the source of validity of our knowledge, and which is the source of the universality of knowledge. This could be an explanation. And yet, this same idea about the possibility of talking about an independent reality, we know has been present in the history of humanity many times, and has been questioned at the same time many times, because it is not so easy to claim that indeed one can claim that there is an independent reality that gives validity to what we do. Does science allow us to do so? But scientists say that science is a hypothetical deductive system of explanations. If it is hypothetical, then in what sense reality validates science? So the very question, the very manner of answer of the coherences of human life in terms of reality has a great question mark on top, which I'm not inventing. This is a question mark that has been present along the history of Western philosophy many times, has been brought to the fore. And yet I'm claiming at the same time that I make reference to that I am, that we are, as living systems, the present of a wave front that began when life began to expand, to transform. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about, and I shall reflect about how come that we can say what we say, which is the source of validity of what I say, which is generally the source of validity of what anybody may say, and see if this has some consequences through our reflections in our understanding of human relations. Because we live a culture in which we demand from each other through knowledge. We claim knowledge, and knowledge becomes a demand. We fight for knowledge. People say knowledge gives power, and things of the sort. What is knowledge? What is to know? Okay, this is the cosmos in which I invite you to reflect with me for these 3 days. And I want to do this reflecting on a particular question. Now, questions are not trivial things, because the question, of course, specifies a particular domain of curiosity in which one wants certain particular kind of answers. But the formulation of the question also specifies the answer that one accepts. So it is not a trivial thing to ask a question at all. And I want to ask a particular question. At the same time, I have no way of telling, I could, but I have no way of validating what I would say if I were to tell you, you must consider this question. And you don't must consider the question that I'm going to present. I'm inviting you to consider the question with me. You do not have to. It's an invitation. In a way, you already have accepted an invitation because you have come. Invitations are very beautiful because you can not accept them. If you do not accept an invitation, nothing is altered. you are in equal good terms with the person that has invited you when you say, no, thank you, I do not accept the invitation. Because if the person who invites you becomes angry because you do not accept the invitation, this means that it was not an invitation, it was a demand. So this is an invitation. I shall not become angry if you do not accept. And the invitation is to consider one particular question and the consequences of considering this question. And the question is about us. How can we do what we do? And we do many things. We make distinctions, we make claims, we do explanations. How can we do what we do? We make cognitive statements. How can we do what we do? Now, this is a different question about cognition than the usual manner of asking this question. I have just been reading a book in which the question about cognition is formulated in terms of which are the conditions that make knowledge possible. Now, if you listen to this formulation, you realize that it is presented as if to know were already something that one understands. Another form of this question would be, which are the conditions that make the knowledge of reality possible? If one formulates the question in this manner, one is already presupposing the accessibility of reality. So one is giving already a fundamental element to the answer. To know is to know something about something. Now I'm asking a different question. I'm asking the question, how can we do that which we can do as human beings? And what do we do? Well, we do distinctions, explanations, cognitive claims. How can we do that? And to answer that question, we have to use what we do. We do explanations. How we do explanations, we have to answer it doing explanations. We do cognitive statements. How we do cognitive statement, we have to answer how we do cognitive statement by making cognitive statements. So the question presented in this manner does not presuppose the answer. Presupposes a starting point, yes, which is us. Because the question is about us. How do we do what we do? How do we explain our operation as observers who explain? So the question is, let this be us, observers, observing. It is essentially the same diagram that you have there, but as I speak, I want to draw it. And who is the observer observing us? Any one of us, doing what we do. And what do? We make distinctions, statements, claims, explanations, questions, answers to the question. How do we do all this? And as I say that it is us, the observers, we human beings, I am at the same time saying that it is us as the kind of beings that we distinguish ourselves being. Because we distinguish ourselves as living beings. Now, how do we distinguish ourselves as living beings? Well, one way is looking at the similarities that exist between us and other entities that we call living beings. We look at animals around us and we find that we resemble the animals with which we relate and that we find. More closely or less closely depending on the animal, but as we examine the animals and we examine ourselves, we find that we resemble, and we resemble so much that we study animals to know ourselves. Medicine, for example, is fundamentally done experimentally in non-human animals. So we are living beings. And we are living beings living. That means as we die, we are not more observers in observing. Now we know this, we claim that there may be a life after death and perhaps we can do things of that kind or another after we die. Yet, if we do anything after we die, it's so different from what we do while we are alive that we cannot claim that it is the same thing. So whenever we're speaking about us as observers, we're speaking about us as living beings. Living, in the living. And I shall write here in the praxis of living. And the praxis of living means only that, living. We find ourselves living when we ask about ourselves as living beings. And since we find ourselves living in the moment in which we ask about ourselves as living beings, living happens to us. We find that living happens to us. We do not really make it. We are not really pushing inside to be alive. It happens that we are alive. No one of us is trying not to die. Oh, some crazy people tries not to die. But you don't have to try not to die. It happens that we're alive. So, in the happening of living, and we also distinguish what happens to us as we talk about our happening. And this is what I shall call here experience. And experience is not experience of something. It's not that we experience the paper there, but experience is that which we distinguish happening to us. Oh, I touch the paper. I find myself touching the paper, and I distinguish this as something that is happening to me. I am talking here. I am in the experience of giving a lecture, of leading a seminar, of interacting with people. It's an experience, that which I distinguish. If I do not distinguish, there is no experience. For example, if I were to ask you, how many of you have a pancreas? I would say that I hope nobody has a pancreas. At the same time, you know through anatomy or medicine or physiology that without a pancreas you cannot live. Yet I'm saying that I hope nobody has a pancreas. Indeed, what I'm saying is I hope that nobody has the distinction of his or her pancreas, because the distinction would arise only when there is a disturbance in relation to the pancreas. So we don't have the experience, we do not live in the experience of pancreas. When we live the experience of the pancreas, we live the experience of pancreatitis, in fact, of inflammation of the pancreas, disease of the pancreas. So that which we do not distinguish doesn't happen to us. So we, observers, observing in the praxis of living, in the happening of living, and experience in language. So this is the starting point, and this is the problem at the same time. What we want to understand or explain is us. How do we do what we do? And I'm inviting to analyze this question and open yourself to realize, and this will become more clear as we go, that we explain what we do through our doing. We're accustomed to think that one explains a phenomenon through reference to something else, and in many occasions certainly we do that. But in this particular case, this is a question in which we are going to explain what we do through our doing. Because it's as we operate as observers that we distinguish what we distinguish, and we shall use what we distinguish to explain how do we operate as observers. And all the explanation will take place in language. In fact, I'm going to claim, and this is not a novelty either, because many people have said this, that what makes us the kind of animals that we are is that we are animals that live in language. It's not that language makes us the kind of animals that we are, it's that we are the kind of animals that we are living in language. And about this I shall say more later. I'm inviting you to shift the attention from being an entity that uses language to being an entity that is constituted in languaging. This is why I say in language. Experience takes place as we distinguish what happens in us, and we distinguish as we make a distinction in language. And how this is the case will be further fundamented later on when I speak about language. Now, what I'm asking then is a question about the observer, and I shall put here this question in 2 points, because I shall do different things with these 2 looks about the question. And what I want to do is to explain. Now, why do I want to explain? Well, because I want to explain. In fact, I am, as a scientist, a person that lives under the passion of explaining. Well, not only scientists live under the passion of explaining. In fact, one of the early questions that children learn is why and what for. Mother, why is this? And the child wants an answer which is either an explanation directly, or maybe will be a description, and eventually the child learns to distinguish the various kinds of questions. But we're always asking, why? What for? What for did you do that? We rarely let people do things without asking them what for or why. You go with a friend walking, and the friend takes out the coat, and you say, why did you take out your coat? The friend answers, because it's too hot. And then 2 blocks beyond, the friend puts the coat on and says, why did you put your coat on? Oh, because it is too cold. Then why did you take your coat in the first case? And so we're always asking each other questions that demands a peculiar answer. And it's not trivial. We get angry about the answers of our questions. In which what we demand is an explanation. We human beings in this present culture live asking each other's questions with a high frequency, questions that demand a particular answer, and the answer that they demand is an explanation. So what I am proposing to do is to ask the question about the observer, but I'm proposing not only to ask the question about the observer, but accept the question. And here is the invitation. I'm inviting you to accept the question about the observer. How come that we can do whatever we can do as observers? How do we do it? How do we explain observing? Or how do we explain living? How do we explain experience? Experience as something that we distinguish in language. As we accept the question about the observer, we accept the question about language. We accept many questions. But we do not always accept the questions that we ask. We frequently ask rhetorical questions, as we call them. Questions that we pose and we do not care about the answer. Or we play answering them in a manner that is not an explanation, but a statement of a property. How can we do what we can do? Oh, well, because we have the ability of doing it. After all, we are human beings that live in language, conscious beings. This is a property of the soul. That is an answer about the question, how do we do what we do, which has not accepted the question. It's an answer to the questioner, not with an explanation, but with a statement that that which he or she is asking needs not to be asked, because it's expression of a property. Oh, well, this knowledge to know is a property of the human mind. It is our humanness. There are many ways of claiming this: the soul, the mind, the spirit, consciousness. We are conscious being, and these are characteristics of consciousness. So in that case, we do not accept the question. But if we accept the question, what do we accept? Well, we accept the question, but what do we accept? We accept that which we are asking can be answered in terms of the proposition of a process or mechanism that gives rise to it. How do you explain that you arrived so late when you were supposed to arrive, let's say, half an hour ago? Oh, it was the traffic. It was very silly of me. I came out of my house thinking that it will take me 20 minutes, but it came in a moment with great traffic and took me, in fact, 45 minutes. Oh, well, next time you must get out of your house much earlier. The answer was accepted. My comment saying, oh, next time you must do this or that, means that I accepted the answer. And what did I accept? I accepted the mechanism proposed by the person that was answering my question, how come that you arrived so late? I accepted the mechanism that he described or she described as such that if it was happening what this person was saying that happened, the result was to be here late. So if I accept the question, I accept that the other or myself may propose a mechanism, a process, such that if it were to take place, the result will be that which I'm explaining. So, in the moment in which I accept the question, how come that we can do whatever we can do as observers, I'm accepting, one, that what we do is not expression of a property, is the result of something. Phenomena must take place such that as a result of those phenomena or processes or mechanisms, observing appears. This is what I'm accepting. I'm accepting that somebody can propose such a mechanism. I'm accepting that I'm willing to listen to this and to consider honestly as a proposition that I may look at it, and then if I find out that it does what it claims, I shall accept it as an explanation. So accepting the question about the observer is not at all trivial, because it means that I am accepting that the abilities of the observer are not endowments, not properties of the soul, not properties of the consciousness. They result from processes, the abilities of the observer. One does not always accept the questions that one is asking. In more than one occasion I have been asked, Dr. Maturana, you are a biologist. Could you tell me what is life? And I said, well, I shall not really tell you what is life, I shall tell you what is living, and let me proceed. And I speak about what living is as a process, I speak about all the dynamics of the organism and so on and so forth, and that all the characteristics of the living being should result from that. And the person says to me, oh no, that cannot be the case. So this person is asking me to answer, but is not willing to accept my answer, either because he's not willing to accept my answer, or because he's not really asking. One could say, oh, it's only establishing a after-dinner conversation. Could be. But if the person is willing to take seriously the question being asked, then will pay attention to the mechanism, and if does not accept the mechanism, will say why not. So if one accepts the question, one is accepting that the abilities of the observer are the result of some processes, and one is willing to listen to a proposition of the processes that if were to take place, the result would be observing. So this is what I'm doing. I'm inviting you to accept the question. And as I invite you to accept the question, I invite you to accept that at least for 3 days, your abilities as observers are not endowments, are not properties that you have, are not constitutive abilities. They are the result of something else. All abilities. Thus, those that we call spiritual, yes, too. Those that we call psychic or the mind, yes. It's an invitation to accept the possibility of explaining what humanness, all those higher characteristics of human beings, the most excels that you can imagine. You are accepting the possibility of explaining them, and you are willing to listen honestly to a proposition and accept or reject the proposition, but through understanding what the proposition is. Because as one accepts the question, one accepts the legitimacy of the proposition, or the legitimacy of proposing an answer. At the same time, I wish to follow the consequences of not accepting the question. What does one do when one does not accept the question? But let us for a moment consider explaining. What do we do when we explain? The child may ask the mother, "Mother, how was I born?" What does the mother answer? "Oh, my child, you were just born." Then she's not accepted the question. "Oh, mother, please tell me, how was I born?" If the mother accepts the question, she has to propose a mechanism. Because if you say to the child, "You were born," the child says, "No, mother, I know I was born. I want to know, how was I born?" So the child knows exactly the difference of one answer with respect to the other. The child knows already what an explanation as an answer is, what must entail. And what the child wants to listen at is a mechanism. It's a little story that tells that if this and this and this and this and this had happened, then the result would be that you are here. And I have said this in other lectures. When I was a child, if one asked such a question, it was likely that one would be told that one was brought from Europe to Chile by a stork flying. And the child would be told, "You were brought by this beautiful big bird that is the stork." And in the beak had a little napkin, and inside, wrapped in this napkin, was the baby, which was you, and deposited in front of the door of the house. I had written saying that I wanted a child, and this was the answer. And I opened the door, and there were you, and I embraced you as I find you in the door of my house, brought by the stork. And the child may accept this. As the child may accept gifts that she finds or he finds in the morning of Christmas Day as being brought by Father Christmas. and commercial activities go into great display of showing the mechanism. They make drawings or sculptures of reindeers pulling a sledge and Father Christmas on it and moving around. So it's a description of the mechanism of how these gifts come to the hands of the child in the Christmas morning. So the child may accept this answer from the mother. And what has the child accepted? A mechanism. A very peculiar mechanism that gives rise to his or her presence here in this family as a child of the family. But a few days later, or a week later, or a month, I don't know, sometime later, this very same child may come back again to the mother and say, "Mother, I do not believe the story of this dog." "Oh, how come you don't believe the story of this dog?" "I don't believe, Mother, because..." And the child is going to propose an explanation himself or herself. "Because my friend Peter says that he will have a brother or a sister, and that this is being made by the mother, that his mother is making a baby. And I went to see Peter's mother, and she has a big belly, and she let me touch her belly, and I could touch the baby moving inside. So I don't believe the story of the stork." And the mother of this child would say, "Oh, well, my dear child, you are big enough, I can explain you the facts of life." And then propose another generative mechanism which has to do with the sperm, the egg, the ovules, the uterus, the growth of the child and the birth, and so on and so forth. And the child say, "Oh, then I can see when the little brother or sister of my friend comes out." "Oh, yes, my child, if Peter's mother allows you to see this, yes, you can see it." And this other answer is also a generative mechanism. It's also a mechanism that you propose, such that if it were to take place, the outcome would be a child, a baby here. So these two answers have the same form. They are different answers, but they have the same form. Both are mechanisms such that if you let them operate, the outcome is that which you wanted to explain. So explanations entail two aspects. One is a formal one, which I have just been talking about. And the form is that of a generative mechanism. A mechanism such that if you let it operate, the result is that which you are explaining. Formal condition. Generative mechanism. But this child had accepted one generative mechanism one day, and days later rejected this generative mechanism and accepted another one. How come this? That means that there is something else that an explanation must satisfy. It must satisfy the formal condition, but there is also an informal condition. an additional condition. I call it informal because it can have many different characteristics. Could also have a certain formalization possible, but not necessarily. It's an additional condition. Now, in the case of the child, we do not know. But we can think about ourselves as children and listen to these two answers, but like children, and find out which we would prefer. Notice that these two answers are equally concrete or equally fantastic. They are equally concrete because they have to do with the experience of the child, with things that the child may claim to have distinguished, and to which you are inviting attention by proposing an explanation. You were brought by a big bird. Now the child has seen birds. Small little birds, bigger birds, perhaps bigger birds too. So when you say a big bird, you are not speaking about anything fantastic. Just speaking about something that belongs to the domain of experiences of the child. If the child had not had any experience of birds, he would say, "What is a bird, mother?" And then you would have to answer with a description. But the mother says, "You were brought by a big bird, which is a stork." And the child says, I'm being carried from one part to another, brought from Europe. Now, if you are in Chile, Europe is there. Perhaps here too, Europe is there, far away. In a way, anything far away could be Europe. So, yeah. You are brought from Europe, you are brought from far away. As a little baby, wrapped in a napkin. This again is not anything fantastic. This child may have seen other babies and may have seen them being protected with clothes and so on, so being wrapped in a napkin is not at all fantastic. And carried by a bird is not fantastic at all, because it is very possible that this child has seen birds carrying things. Birds carrying little things, making their nest, or bigger things. If he has seen a bird of prey, may have seen a bird carrying something larger. So a big bird carrying a baby is not at all fantastic. So the mother resorts to the experience of the child, to those happenings that the child can distinguish as something that has happened to him. But you have seen big birds, haven't you? The mother is referring to something that the child may have distinguished as happening to him or her. So to be brought by a stork from Europe, wrapped in a napkin, and be deposited in front of the house has nothing fantastic at all. And the other answer, the mother makes the child inside her belly, when again is not fantastic, because has seen the mother of his friend with a big belly, has touched and felt the movement of something. So again, the second answer is resorting to the experiences of the child, to something that the child can claim to have experienced. So to be made inside the mother is not at all fantastic. It belongs to daily life as much as to being brought by a stork. Or they are equally fantastic. But anyhow, they have to do with daily life. So under what terms does the child prefer one answer to the other? And this is where this informal condition appears. If you don't propose a generative mechanism, the child insists in the question. But mother, I want But you tell me how. And of course the child has learned to ask this question by living with his family. I think that in the particular case of the child, and I think this for myself, of course, the child may accept being made by the mother because it's closer to the mother. Certainly I prefer to be made by my mother than to be brought from Europe by a stork. I mean, it's more cozy, I'm more intimate with my mother. And I insist in this because this shows that this other criterion can be any. A preference, a dislike. No, I don't like this sort of answers, I prefer these ones. Another formal condition that one can impose. But I put it here informal condition because can be any. This has to be there always. So an explanation is a generative mechanism proposed ad hoc to generate the experience that one wants to explain. Ad hoc. Accepted by an observer. Accepted by a listener. Mother, I don't believe this story. As soon as the child says, I don't believe the story of the stork is not anymore an explanation. So a generative mechanism by itself is not an explanation. An explanation must satisfy these two conditions. And an explanation is an explanation that is a generative mechanism accepted when these two conditions are satisfied. So what I'm saying is that explanations are not in themselves. Now I am resorting to daily life. You notice that I'm using daily life situations. I'm not resorting to any technical domain. I'm resorting to daily life. And I'm resorting to daily life because this is what we have to explain, daily life. Now, if you are a scientist, let's suppose that you are a biologist. I am a biologist. I have spent and I spend an important part of my life in questions of living beings. I have been an experimental biologist. I have not been a naturalist going around the world examining living beings. I have been doing things with them, experiments. And I have spent much of my life in the laboratory. But this is daily life. The laboratory is daily life. And if you are a professional of any kind, a physician, your daily life is the hospital. And it is so much daily life that in fact, as one is immersed in this, one does not distinguish this from other aspects of daily life. One uses the same manner of talking and thinking, although one may have some more technical words. But if you analyze, and we shall analyze them language, you will discover that technical words are not different from ordinary daily life domestic words. Maybe special, but not different in the sense of what they do. So what I'm speaking is about explaining daily life. If we explain daily life, we explain technical life, professional life. The explanation of lightning, for example, will have to satisfy these two conditions. Whatever explanation will be an explanation only in the moment in which is a generative proposition, a generative mechanism proposed, accepted by a listener, as it satisfies, in addition, also some informal condition. And you will notice if you go to a scientific meeting or to a philosophical meeting, and the discussions about explanations will be about these 2 points explicitly or implicitly. It is not true that all scientists are aware that this is the case. I would be inclined that philosophers may be aware, but it is not true that they are always aware, because it is not true that one is considering that explanations happen in this way. We belong to a culture that inclines us to think that explanations are in themselves. And what I'm saying is that explanations are not in themselves. Explanations are a peculiar interpersonal relation in which there is a question and an answer that must satisfy some conditions in the listening of the person that accepts the answer as an explanation. So this is very interesting, because as one begins to reflect upon this, one also begins to encounter human relations. Notice that I could have put a little title to this initial part of my presentation, epistemology, and would have been legitimate to put so. Epistemology. Epistemology has to do with the fundamentation of knowledge. It's a philosophical domain in which you reflect upon how knowledge is fundamented. What conditions must be satisfied so that we can know would be an epistemological question. So, how do we do what we do is an epistemological question. But at the same time, we find out that as we reflect upon this, and we stop for a moment to reflect about explanations, it turns out that explanations are interpersonal relations. And this is a very interesting thing, because we do not live them in those ways. We live our relations as if explanations were in themselves. The validity of an explanation was in the explanation, not in the relations between the person that makes the question, the person that answers, and the person that makes the question again, which could be the same person, by the way. You may have read Gregory Bateson. If you have read Gregory Bateson, you know that he's insisting on epistemologies, different epistemologies. Now, different epistemologies are different domains of interpersonal relations. Different systems of explanations. He doesn't say that these are different domains of interpersonal relations. But as we realize that explanation is a manner of interpersonal relation, then we realize that epistemology may have to do with interpersonal relations. Or one can realize that it has to do with interpersonal relations in the moment in which you analyze what is taking place in the understanding of what happens in explaining. Notice at the same time that if we do not ask this question about the observer, we do not see this. As I shall show in a moment, if we do not ask the question about the observer, and I shall mention it immediately better, if we do not ask the question about the observer, by not accepting this question or not asking this question, we are accepting that we have the ability to do the things that we do as observers, as endowments, as constitutive properties of human consciousness, as expressions of human mind or human spirit or human soul, depending on how we handle this. And we accept that that which we claim that we do in knowing is something that we obviously can do. And when we do not accept this question, we can attend, and we attend to what we do, we may realize that when we explain, we pretend to refer to what happens in a domain which is independent from us. Yes, generative mechanism, but without considering this informal condition. Of course, the child has to accept that the child is made by the mother because this is the case. Reality is that children are made inside the belly of the mother. Yet, reality is not that children are made as in the Brave New World of Aldous Huxley in a test tube. The child accepts that the children are made by the mother because this is the fact. This is what we would be saying if we are not reflecting upon how come that we can do what we can do as observers. Because by not accepting the question, we're accepting that we have this ability to refer to reality. And to know is a reference to reality. And this is why the let's say almost standard manner, I mean, not every philosopher is the same, or every scientist is the same, but the more general standard manner of asking about cognition is to ask about how come that we can know? What are the conditions that such that knowledge can take place? And that means knowledge of that which is reality. So we are accepting the ability to make reference to reality. So we start with the implicit assumption that we do not take as an assumption, we take as an obvious condition that we know that there is a reality, and what we have to see is what condition must be satisfied that we can say something about this reality that we already know that is there. Which are the conditions that must be satisfied so that knowledge can take place? And in that attitude, then explanations are in themselves because they have to do with reality. If it is only when we accept this question that we are accepting an explanation about the observer, that we seriously ask the question, what do we do when we explain? And we are open to realize that this has to do with the observer and observing, because after all, what we are going to explain eventually is the observer. So here, the observer is accepted as having the ability to make reference to something independent from him or her to validate the explaining. So the explanation is valid in its reference to reality, so the validity of the explanation does not depend on the observer, depends on its coherence with reality. So we don't see this informal condition. We may see a formal condition, but we do not see this informal one. Now, indeed, there is an informal one, which is the supposition that it refers to reality. But we don't see that this is a supposition, because this is, in fact, the starting condition. We don't see it as a supposition. So we don't make the reflection, and we don't see that there is this informal condition in addition to the formal one. Okay, this is a very interesting thing, because we begin to see this only if we ask this question. Because as we ask this question, we're accepting that our abilities as observer are the result of a process, of a mechanism. And then we realize that if we do not accept this question, then we are accepting that we have this ability as an endowment. Now, I'm not claiming either that nobody has ever made this reflection. Of course, this has been made in one way or another. But the notion that knowledge has to do with reference to reality, or that reality is the source of validation of knowledge, even if it cannot be properly reached, even if you cannot make a full claim, even if your cognitive statements are only hypothetical, reality is there, and reality is either invalidating your proposition or letting it be. But then philosophers have thought about this, or scientists have thought about this, and with this fundamental attitude, that this cultural attitude that there must be a reality that fundaments as a reference our knowledge, and about which our knowledge has to do even if it is incomplete. Whenever we make this reflection, we dismiss this, because one of the things that will happen is that if we accept this question, then we shall realize that we cannot make any reference to an independent reality. And to accept that we cannot make any reference to an independent reality is not trivial, because contradicts a fundamental cultural attitude. And what you will find is that the argument would generally be, if there were not a reality, everything would be chaotic. It is the coherences of reality that permits that life is not chaotic. I call this explanatory path, as you see in the diagram you have there, the path of objectivity. And I call it the path of objectivity because in daily life, when we speak about objectivity or being objective, we are speaking about referring to something independent from us as observers. As the fundament, the source of validation of what we say. I'm objective means, in the first instance, what I say is valid not because I say it, but because it has to do with reality. reason allows me to know that this has to be so, because if not, everything would be chaos. And reason, well, is taken as a primary ability. It's a property of the human mind, rationality. In fact, rationality is what differentiates us from other animals. In order to question that, we have to ask about reason and rationality. How does rationality arise? How do you explain rationality? And then you are asking about the observer, and you fall into this other domain. Because to ask how come that rationality takes place? What is rationality as a phenomenon? What manner of operation of living system constitutes rationality? Then you are asking about how do you do what you do? So you are here. And if you accept this question about rationality, then what you have to propose is a generative mechanism which has to satisfy a formal condition and an informal one. Now, as you accept this question, in the process of finding a generative mechanism, you have to resort to some elements. As in the case of explaining how the child is born, the mother says, you were brought by a stork. She resorts to certain elements like bird, speaks bird, carrying things, distance, places in the distance, and so on and so forth, movement of the birds, such that you can make this mechanism and the result be the child deposited in front of the house. Or being made by the mother, a little egg and the sperm and the fusion and the implantation in the uterus and the growth and eventually coming out. So if you ask about that, you have to look for a domain of entities or phenomena, processes, such that you could propose a generative mechanism such that observing may arise as a result. And to do that, of course, if you are a scientist or an ordinary person, you will look to the conditions that interfere with it, that interfere with your observing. And you will soon realize that anything that interferes with living interferes with observing. Death, disease, substances that one ingests, drugs. Oh, he's drunk. I mean, don't believe what he's talking about. He's drunk. His biology has been altered by alcohol, so he's operating differently such that his cognitive states are not valid in the domain in which non-altered conditions would take place. Not altered biological conditions would take place. So biology it begins to have a generative presence. The abilities of the observer are the result of its biology. So then you begin to look at the biology. And several things begin to be apparent when you begin to look at the biology willingly, in the sense of accepting the biology as a source of processes that would constitute the generative mechanism through which these beautiful human abilities result. And one of the things that you begin to notice is that us, as biological beings, have certain peculiar characteristics. And one of these characteristics, or several of these characteristics, appear in some words that we use in daily life. Like lie and mistake. Or error. Perception. Illusion. These are very interesting words in daily life. We use them and we do very different things according to which word we are using in these cases. When we speak about perception, if we are not psychologists properly speaking in the domain of psychology, we take perception to refer to the act of grasping something that is independent from us. In fact, perception comes from the Latin per capire, through capture, means capturing something which is there. And illusion, we use this word illusion to refer to an experience that we distinguish, but which does not correspond to something external to us, or is a mistaken view of something that is independent from us. You go in the street and you say hello to a friend, and then realize, excuse me, I was an illusion, I thought you were so and so, excuse me. Illusion is an experience which is not valid in a particular situation in which it arises. So we have these two words, and this other one, mistake and error. Mistake or error and lie. Now, what is interesting in the experiences to which these words refer is the moment in which they occur. A lie occurs in the moment in which it takes place. I lied yesterday means that yesterday, when I was saying what I was saying, I had all the elements to claim that what I was saying was not valid. Yet I spoke as if it were valid. I was lying. And I was aware. This is a lie. You are lying. Means you are saying something that you know, you have all the elements in this moment through which one can claim that what you are saying is not valid. This is a lie. And a mistake or an error is something that you leave in the moment in which you leave it as valid. You have all the elements to claim it is valid, what you leave or what you say, and afterwards, through some other experience, you claim that that was not the case. But in the moment in which you said what was a mistake, in the moment in which you said it, you leave it in its legitimacy. Only afterwards you claim, no, now I know that that which I lived or said then was not valid. So lies occur in the moment and mistakes occur afterwards. When we commit a mistake, we do not commit a mistake. The mistake is afterwards. I said, yesterday I committed a mistake, but in the moment in which I was doing it was not a mistake, it was valid. So today I committed a mistake yesterday. But yesterday I lied, the lie was taking place yesterday. Something similar happens with perception and illusion. Illusion is an experience that you leave as valid in the moment in which you leave it, and then afterwards, through another experience, you invalidate. Hello, John. So there, I leave my encounter with John. I like John, he's my friend, my heart goes jumping with joy. And then, excuse me, an illusion. Or a mistake, an illusion or a mistake, an error. My joy was for nothing because it was not John. But in the moment in which I see John, I leave John. So an illusion is also a posteriori, it's afterwards. In the moment in which you leave it, you don't leave it as an illusion, you leave it as a perception. But afterwards you claim it's an illusion. So an illusion and mistakes takes place afterwards. Lies and perceptions take place in the moment. Now, what is interesting about illusion and perception is that in both cases you can use a reference to some other experience. In the case of perception, you make a reference to another experience to validate it. In the case of illusion, you make a reference to another experience to invalidate it. Now, how come that we have illusions? How come that when I see John, I leave whatever happens to me when I see John? If he's my friend, I'm joyful. If it's somebody I do not like, I leave the unpleasantness of meeting somebody I do not like. And afterwards, I say, oh, okay, that was an illusion. I invalidate whatever happened to me. How come that we live illusions? How come that we commit mistakes? Frequently, one says, well, we cannot know reality fully because we are fallible. Human being is fallible. That is, human beings commit mistakes. And mistakes are mistakes. It's taking that which is in the wrong manner. But if you are asking this question, then the question about mistake and illusion has a different character. Because you cannot just dismiss a mistake as a mistake, because you leave it when you leave it as valid. So a mistake is not just a mistake. A mistake is an experience that is devaluated through reference to another experience. When you ask this question. If you do not ask this question, a mistake is a mistake. I mean, the reality is there and you have done some inadequate thing and you claim for a moment that something is the case when it's not the case. So the mistake is a mistake. You don't pay attention to what happens to you. But when you accept the question about the observer, of course you are paying attention to what happens to you. And then a mistake is something very interesting. It's something that you leave as valid in the moment in which you leave it. An illusion is something that you leave as valid in the moment in which you leave it, and that you devaluate through some other experience. And in daily life we play with this because we are continuously asking in daily life another question, which is, how do you know? What other experience allowed you to confirm this? So we play with other experiences. Why? Because in daily life we know that we commit mistakes and have illusions. And in daily life, illusions are not trivial at all, because in daily life we realize that illusions involved us. We cannot claim that I was not happy when I saw John. I cannot pretend. I say, oh, pity. John would have been wonderful, that had been John, but it was an illusion. So the consequences of my having this illusion in my life are not trivial, because I live this exactly as I live the perception. The only thing is that I devaluate it through reference to something else. Now, when I live a perception, when I live an experience which I validate through another experience, how do I know that this other experience is not an illusion? Well, I validate through reference to another experience. And how do I know that this other experience is not an illusion? Well, I validate through reference to another experience, and so on and so forth, and make come a whole circle in this dynamics of validation. So, as soon as you accept this question, illusions have a different presence. And what is interesting then about illusions is that you cannot dismiss them anymore. You have to explain them. And in the process of explaining, the generative mechanism is an illusion is an experience that you live as valid, which then you devaluate through a reference to another illusion, such that, through another experience, such that that experience that you call an illusion is an illusion to the extent that this other experience is valid. And sometimes I invite people to cross the two fingers and touch the nose tip, and this is something that we have played as children, cross them very much, and then touch the nose tip with both fingers, and as you play tenderly, it's your nose, so play tenderly with it, you notice that you have two nose tips. And then you are frightened. And you say, oh, who has a mirror? Please, lend me a mirror. I have only one. So this is an illusion because the mirror says that they have only one. But if I believe my touching, then this is an illusion. So, as we accept this question, because we want to explain this, we cannot just dismiss illusions. And the fantastic thing is that in the experience, we cannot distinguish perception and illusion. If you are in a train station or in a bus station where there are other buses and you are there waiting to go, and suddenly you have the impression that you are going, and the moment afterwards you realize that it is the other bus that is going. In the moment in which you have this experience, your whole body is going. And there are many beautiful situations that enhance this and allow you to play with this curious situation in which you experience something and then you have another experience through which you devaluate this.
Is that the Gestalt experience also?
Yeah. And this is very interesting because when one is in the experience, this is beauty, and there, this is it, this is what you see or what you feel or touch. The same with understanding. You have a particular understanding and is everything coherent. And then through some argumentation you get a different understanding and this becomes immediately incoherent and this new coherence is there. And you say, oh, this was a mistake. Yet when you lived it, you live it in its coherence, in its validity. So, as you accept this question, then you cannot dismiss the biology and you realize that you cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion. Now, I'm not claiming that this is new at all. In fact, there are different philosophical traditions which have to do with the recognition of this experiential indistinguishability between perception and illusion. And the different traditions have to do with what do you validate. For example, in the Oriental mystical tradition, you devaluate perception and you value illusion. Everything is an illusion. Buddhism arises in a tradition in which everything is an illusion. In our Western culture, illusions are to be dismissed. Only perceptions are valid. What I'm doing then in this moment is inviting you to accept this curious situation that in the experience we cannot distinguish between perception and illusion. So I'm inviting you to accept both perception and illusion. Not to devaluate illusions because perception is only the important thing, or to devaluate perception because illusion is only the important thing. Both are valid, and we have to handle our explaining with that. But if in the experience we cannot distinguish between perception and illusion, then we have no way of arguing about our abilities to say something about something independent from us. And this is not a trivial point. Because then reason is not an adequate argument. Because we can have a rational argument to validate something, and after a while we can generate a rational argument to invalidate that. And in fact we use rationality to demonstrate God, to show that God does not exist, to defend this particular system of notions, to invalidate this same particular system of notions. We use rationality for everything. And as we reflect upon this, we may realize that our rationality is founded, as we shall see later on emotions. So, if we take seriously that we cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion, then we realize here in this explanatory path, through accepting the question about the observer, that we cannot make any reference about reality, about a reality that is in a way independent from us. We cannot even claim that it has any sense to talk about an independent reality. And that it has no sense at all to speak about an independent reality will become more apparent as we talk about language. So, what is happening here is that two different domains of explanations are appearing, according to whether one accepts or one does not accept the question about the observer. And these two different systems of explanation will differ in many, many different manners, and I shall stop. David is inviting me to stop for a while. These two explanatory domains will, in the long run, differ in what this notion of reality means. And so I shall leave this point for the moment. And what happens, David?
We break for coffee.
We break for coffee. Crack!
Break for about 15 minutes. That means we break for about 15 minutes or so. It's okay. I'd just like to find out, because the sound over here is not good. We could possibly have the air conditioning turned off for people, and we could also get rid of the aisle, so we could bring everyone over this way. Would that be okay?
Just the air conditioning.
Just the air conditioning. Okay.
Good. Let us suppress the air conditioning.
15 minutes.
I call this explanatory path in a manner that refers to the awareness that we do not distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion. we do not distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion, and the distinction is made through reference to another experience, and this other experience is equally validated or invalidated through reference to another experience, then we cannot claim that we have any way to refer to something independent from us. Because as we make a reference to something that we claim is independent from us, for example, having two nose tips, then we can have another experience of which we say, aha, no, this was an illusion because this is valid. So we have no way of referring to something independent from us. And this will become more apparent as we speak a little bit more about living systems later. Now, this awareness I indicate by putting objectivity in parentheses. So an explanation is the proposition of a generative mechanism in the terms I have indicated there. And as we accept the question about the observer, we accept explaining, we become aware that we cannot distinguish between perception and illusion in the experience, and hence that we have no way of referring to something independent from us to validate our explanations. I connote that awareness by putting objectivity in parentheses. So objectivity in parentheses is not subjectivity. Objectivity in parentheses, I put it there to mean I am aware that I cannot claim that I can distinguish between perception and illusion in the experience, hence I am aware that I cannot claim that I can make reference to something independent from what I do to validate my explanations. Subjectivity belongs to the domain of objectivity. It is if one can be objective that one can be subjective. Now, if I cannot validate my explaining through reference to something independent from what I do, what do I validate my explaining with? Through some additional informal condition. This additional informal condition is in the long run a criterion which selects this. This additional informal condition is in the long run the criterion of which I select this formal proposition from this other formal proposition in order to accept this one and not this one. So what I find out is that I validate my explanations with what I do. The observer validates his or her explanation to what he or she does. What validates the explanation that what validates the generative mechanism proposed that the child is made by the mother as an explanation is the acceptance through something else that happens to the child of this criterion, of this proposition in preference to this other one. And this could be any. For example, closeness to the mother, intimacy. At the same time, this means that there will be many different systems of explanations according to these informal conditions that one adds. which results in that one accepts different systems of generative mechanisms according to this informal condition, which defines a whole constellation of generative mechanisms as generative mechanisms of some kind. For example, physical explanations, biological explanations, football as a system of explanations, Christianity as a system of explanations, Buddhism as a system of explanation, Marxism as a system of explanations, capitalism as a system of explanations. Each one of these is a system of generation of generative mechanism, a system of generative mechanism which are of one general kind through the informal condition that they all satisfy in the listening of the observer. Physical explanations, for example, in classic physics, are explanations which satisfy coherences between mass, time, and distance. If you operate with relations of mass, time, and distance, then you get classic physics. So here there will be many systems of explanations, each one defined through some kind of informal condition that must be satisfied. But this informal condition is arbitrary in the sense that can be any, but it's not fantastic because pertains to what the observer distinguishes in his or her experience. The child prefers to be made by the mother, and this preference, whatever expression has in his life, he may not word about it, but he likes to be made by the mother. Pertains to his or her experience. A system of explanations founded on operations with mass, time, and distance pertain to the domain of experiences of the physicist as operations in experience or experiences that the physicist lives. Time, mass, and distance are experiences, are distinctions of what the observer lives in terms of doing something. Now, remember, this is so much so that there are these offices for standard. For example, a meter is what? A distance specified through some procedure, but which is conserved as a particular distance in the Office of Standards in Paris. An object made of certain material. And this is a meter, and this is a centimeter, and a millimeter, and a micron, and all our measurements are of this kind. Time, seconds. We can choose as a reference some periodic dynamic of atoms, but these are also experiences. The periodicity of oscillation of electrons in an atom, for example, which you can use as a measure of time, is that which you distinguish in your experience doing certain things in which this periodicity arises. So all these different explanatory domains are different domains of explanations in which you use, or we use, experience coherences of experience to validate generative mechanisms that explain experience. As we accept the question about the observer, we become aware that what we explain is experience. Now, we have known this all the time because in this domain, without asking the question about the observer, perhaps we speak about phenomena, we explain phenomena. And we speak about phenomena, something that takes place there independently from us. Well, but the word phenomena is very beautiful. It comes from the Greek phenos, which has to do with seeing. So phenomena, what we see. And what is that we see is it's experience. It's that which we distinguish that we see. But as we speak about phenomena, and we are not aware of our involvement because we deny it by not asking the question about the observer, we say phenomena are there, independent from us, and you find them. You find phenomena in nature. You find those phenomena, and then you want to explain them. And we speak as if phenomena were independent from us. And at the same time, philosophers would say, well, no, I mean, phenomena have to do with the observer. And there is a sort of flow of contradiction, but we are speaking as if what we are dealing with is independent from us. Because in the moment in which we acknowledge that it is not independent from us, that has to do with what we do, then we are here. And if we are here, then we sooner or later have to realize that we cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion. If we dismiss the distinctions in distinguishability, we dismiss it and say, well, this is not fundamental, because there must be a reality, then we have dismissed this question and we have come back to this explanatory path. If we accept this experiential indistinguishability, then we are here, and then we realize that what we explain indeed is experience with experience. So each explanatory domain is a domain of explanations of experiences with experiences. I call this many realities. And I call it these many realities because we leave each one of these explanatory domains as a domain of objects. Reality comes from the Latin res, which means object. Many domains of object, different kinds of objects. But different kinds of objects which arise in different systems of explanation, in our awareness that we are not claiming any independent existence for these objects. We are aware that these various objects, the physical object, the biological object, the religious objects, arise in the explanations of experience, are not transcendental, do not refer to transcendental domain. And as we realize this, then we realize also that reality here is indeed an explanatory argument. Reality is an argument to explain phenomena or experience in the domain in which we do not ask the question about the observer. And we assume that something exists with independency from us, and we use a reference, direct or indirect reference to that, to validate our explanations. So reality, as we ask the question about the observer, becomes an explanatory argument. If you have read Gregory Bateson, I think that it is The Ecology of Mind. I do not remember in which of his books.
steps in the ecology of mind.
Steps. He has a metalogue with his daughter in which the daughter asks, "Father, what is an instinct?" And the father answers, "An explanatory device," or something like that. An explanatory proposition. And what does it explain? Anything. Whatever you want to explain, you can explain it with instinct. Well, the same thing happens here. What is reality? An explanatory notion. What does it explain? Anything. Whatever you want to explain. The difference in objectivity in parentheses is that you are aware that you cannot claim that. And that these, of course, are explanatory domains in their own right. You're aware of this. You are not using reality as an explanatory principle, but you are generating many different realities as domains of explanations. Now, this has several interesting consequences. One is that you, or one, you, I, when I say you, I mean you, me, myself, any one of us that is doing these reflections, can become aware that in this explanatory path, in which you do not ask about how do the abilities of the observer arise, what one is doing is accepting existence as independent from oneself. The notion of existence refers to something that takes place independent from what the observer does. When we talk about the existence of something, we are talking about the occurrence of something with independency from what we do. So existence is independent of what the observer does. Whenever we discuss about whether something is or not the case and about existence, our whole discussion is around claiming that something is or not there independently from what we do. In this other explanatory path, existence arises in what the observer does. In this explanatory path, when we ask about the existence of something, what we ask is about the conditions under which that something appears. What do I have to do such that such a thing is distinguished? How do you distinguish it? Oh, you do this and this and that. Well, I have done that and that and that and nothing happens. Then it is not there. At home, the mother says to the child, "John, please go to the bedroom and bring me the purse that is on the bed." So the child goes and says, "No, mother, there is no purse on the bed." The child performed some operation, and as a result of the operation that the child performed, nothing appeared. Oh, cannot be. Please go again and look. The child goes again, comes back. No, mother, there is no purse on the bed. And the mother says, cannot be. She goes there and says, look, there, you see, it is here. And she picks up the purse from the bed. Now, which is the difference? Well, they were performing different operations. We do not know what operation was the child performing, but the child was performing an operation which was not realized in the distinction of a purse, and she said, no, mother, there is no purse. My mother, when she loses something, for example, the keys, and she cannot find them, she calls them. She says, keys, 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 and she immediately finds them. They appear. Immediately they appear. Now, this is very interesting thing, because there you are looking for the keys, and you do not find them, you call them, and then you find them. So you know now what way can you find what you have lost. Now, it's an interesting question, because this is of daily experience. What happens? Well, according to this explanatory path, I would claim that what happens is that the operation of distinction that you perform changes. You go there looking for keys, and you are doing something in looking for keys. You do not see them. Then you call the keys. Your internal dynamic changes, and you do something different, and then the keys appear. Now, we leave this as if the keys or the purse had been there all the time once we make the distinction. But unless we make the distinction, we cannot claim that anything was there before. Once we have made the distinction, we can claim, or we claim, that it was there all the time. So, as soon as we bring forth in our explanation a particular domain of entities, we leave this domain of entities as if it had existed all the time. Now, this is a very interesting point, because I said at the beginning, we are the present of a wave front. And this is an image that it is not so strange for us. And it's not so strange for us because in our living, we're aware that we talk about the past, we talk about the future, but neither the past nor the future is accessible. The past is not accessible. The future is not accessible. We live in a changing present. And this is our daily experience. I mean, here we are talking in a changing present in which whatever I said an hour ago is inaccessible to us as happening an hour ago. It's accessible to us as a manner of being now in the present. So we live our experience and we explain our changing present, yes, inventing the past as a domain of coherences that if were to take place, the present would arise, but which is conceived from the coherences of the present. So the past is an explanation of the present through the coherences of the present. And this is how we live. And we belong to a culture which is this changing present in which we can make these reflections and arguments. So we distinguish something now, and we distinguish it as we distinguish it with a history that explains it now. I find the keys, I said they must have been there all the time because otherwise I would not find them. So each one of these domains of reality as a domain of explanation arises with its history. And of course will be the different history depending on the domain of reality that we bring forth, which will be bring forth according to certain coherences that we are living in the present. When I said living systems are the present of a history that began 3,500 million years ago, this is an explanation of our present through the coherences of the present, extrapolated, constituting a past. Ah, but you have these fossil remains in the rocks. Yeah. This is the present. I find certain things in the rocks which I explain by claiming that they are the result of a particular history of transformation, blah, 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 blah. So what is involved here is explaining. The whole diagram is dealing with the question of explaining. If we do not ask this question about the observer, we deal with the question of reality. But as we ask the question about the observer, we stop dealing with reality and we begin to deal with explaining of experience. As we do not ask the question about the observer, whenever we speak about experience, we speak about experiencing something, that which is there. As we accept this question, we begin to become aware that experience is not something that is there, it's something that we distinguish now as happening to us. And what we are explaining is what happens to us. And in this explaining, we realize that we are a changing present. Now, this is a very interesting thing because we are so accustomed to live in the continuous explanation of a present through a reference to a history that we deem somehow real, even if sometimes we commit mistakes about what we claim, that has to do with reality. That when we realize, we become aware that what we are dealing with is with explanations of experience, this seems to be shaking. And the only thing that we are changing is the explanation of experience. We have always lived the same flow of experiences. And the only thing that we are changing is explanation. Now, why is this not trivial? Well, it is not trivial because if we change the explanation, our life changes. There are many situations that we claim in history in which the past has been rewritten. I mean, the pharaohs rewrote the past. When a pharaoh came to be enthroned in the throne of the pharaohs in Egypt and wanted to claim a presence that went beyond the moment in which he became a pharaoh, changed the past, changed the writings in the temple, changed history. I was listening last night a little bit to a television program about Franco. I do not know if some of you witnessed it, and this was a very interesting one because it had to do with rewriting history. And the rewriting of history had to do with how Franco appeared to the Spanish people, and how by looking now at the present as it is being lived now, you had to rewrite history because what is being said that was the case according to how we live the present was not the case. About how come that he became a dictator, what happened in his encounter with Hitler when the encounter in the frontier of Spain and France. And as you rewrite history, then the whole thing changes. Your present changes, your future changes, because your past has changed. Because the past is a manner of explaining the present. Sometimes this liberates you, sometimes this encages you, depends. So what is involved here is explaining experience. Now, why is this not trivial? How come that this has to do with our living, not with the world? Well, it has to do with the world we live, yes. And it has to do with the world we live because this has to do with human relations. Explanations are a manner of interpersonal relations. But when we say we are objective, we are also entering a particular dynamics of interpersonal relations. When I say I'm objective, I'm saying the following things. First, I have a privileged access to reality. Second, you must do what I say. Now, isn't that, this is, yeah, whenever you say or I say I'm objective, means you have to do what I say. I'm not objective. You don't have to do what I say. I'm not objective at all. When you tell somebody else you must be realistic, then you are telling you must do what I say. So, this statement that one makes in this particular explanatory path are claimed to be statements about something that is independent of the observer, but are a manner of relating with other human beings in which what is there is a demand for obedience. You must be objective, you are demanding obedience. I am realistic, you are demanding obedience. I know this objectively, you demand obedience. And this is not trivial at all. In this other explanatory path, to the extent that you do not know that you can make a reference to something independent from you to validate your explaining, because you cannot distinguish in the experience between perception and illusion, when you make a statement, you are aware that your statement is valid according to certain criterion that makes it valid. When you claim an explanation, you are aware that what you are claiming is, I'm proposing a generative mechanism, which I accept because it satisfies, its proposition satisfies also some other condition. So you are taking responsibility in what you say. You are not demanding obedience. You are inviting to participate in a particular domain of explanations, which implicitly you are willing to disclose fully. That means you are willing to say which other criterion you put. If you were to ask the child, why do you prefer this explanation or another, the child would tell you immediately why. Say, oh, mother, I have never seen a stork. Huh? This is a perfectly legitimate answer. It's telling you this criterion that this child has for rejecting this and accepting the other. Or could tell you, oh, mother, but it's so wonderful to be made by you, to have been made by you. It's telling you immediately. But if you are making a statement in objectivity, in the explanatory path of objectivity, you never ask, how do you know? Because if you ask, how do you know, you are not there anymore, you are here. How do you know? Oh, I know it. Your voice changes, you become more authoritarian. I mean, what are you asking me, how do I know? Of course I know it. We do it, don't we? Well, some people does not do it, but this is a It is interesting. Whenever we want the other to do what we want the other to do, we claim to be objective, to be realistic. Listen to the radio, to the television program, to conversations of people. Be candorous about yourself. I mean, just innocent listening to yourself, and you will find that occasionally this is what we do. But if you have done this reflection, then you can say, haha, my goodness, what I'm doing. What I'm doing. Then you say, well, I say that this is so because blah, 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 and you provide this. If you have already presented the generative mechanism, you provide this. This is the criterion I use to accept this generative mechanism. And the other person may answer, oh, I don't like this criterion, I prefer this other one. And then you do not quarrel. Or at least, if you quarrel, you do it with responsibility. You don't claim that the other is mistaken. You say, I don't like that. I don't like that you like that criterion. So, excuse me, I'm going to proceed to eliminate you, and you take it. But you eliminate with responsibility. There is a tango. You know tangos. A tango which I call the tango of responsibility. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing it to you. But I'm going to recite it, at least a particular piece. This tango says, officer, please arrest me. I am a criminal. The proofs of my infamy, my criminality, I carry in my suitcase. The traces of my beloved and the heart of the traitor of my friend, and the heart of his heart. So this person is taking responsibility. I have killed this woman, and I have killed this man, and I take responsibility because I accept the consequences. Arrest me, please, Mr. Officer. This is a respectable man. It is respectable because he's taking responsibility. May deserve to be punished according to the law. This is fine. This person is taking responsibility. But if you have killed the other because the other was mistaken, because the other was committing an intrinsic crime, you never take responsibility. The other was mistaken. I defend myself claiming that the other was mistaken. I don't have to be taken into prison. The other was mistaken. It was not I who killed him. I only pulled the trigger, but he was killed by his actions. But here you take responsibility, because you know that you do not have a privileged access to a reality, and hence you do not have a privileged access to the truth. So this parenthesis business is a very interesting one. It has to do with awareness. Now, if it has to do with awareness, it has to do with a very interesting operation, which is to look at your circumstance. That means that you perform this operation to look at your circumstance. And then you can do things that you cannot do if you are not willing to look at your circumstance. And I shall end for going to lunch with a little joke. I think I have told this joke before because it's a very beautiful one. When my brother and I were children in Chile, this must have been in the late 40s or middle of 40s, there was in Santiago a political magazine called Topase, in which political jokes appeared and other jokes. And this was a very remarkable one, because these were two crazy fellows talking to each other. You knew that they were crazy because the eyes were drawn with little spirals. So one of these crazy fellows asked the other, "What do I have in my hand?" So the second one looks and says, "A cow." And the first one says, "Oh, there is cheating, you saw the tail." Isn't this fantastic? And it is so, because if the tail doesn't come out, how do you know that he has a cow in the hand? Isn't it so? But look, I mean, this is a very interesting story. If something does not come out, you cannot know what is in the hand. We invented with my brother a game. We would ask each other suddenly, "What do I have in my hand?" And the other would say, a locomotive. "Oh, you saw the smoke." And this was the game, and to find what must come out so that you can know what is in the hand of the other. Now, but this is a very interesting thing, because reflection has to do with that. Because if nothing comes out, you do not know that you have a cow in your hand. To know what you have to open the hand. Open the hand. And as you open the hand, what you have there may fall. So you don't open the hand. And so you don't reflect. So reflection has to do with opening the hand to see what you have there. And this, of course, you do not do when you are in this explanatory path. If you know the truth, you don't reflect. It is only when you don't claim to own the truth, to know how things really are, that you can reflect. And if you reflect, then you can always be out of any trap. So now we go to lunch.